It's pretty remarkable. And then we're going to dance around some of the stuff that I've been looking at and apply it to what this guy is going to talk about. And he's talking about linking the brain and it being the future of warfare and the future of covert intelligence operations, speaking to a group of Army officers at West Point.
Sounds heavy.
Yeah, that's an hour. And then we're going to start digging into, at a high level, what 5G can do to the body and the brain and the soul. And then we're going to get into next show, ultra wideband thermoacoustics and how ultrasound can manipulate cells. But that is after we go through how to calculate DNA resonance so that any radio transmitter can resonate your DNA down to a single gene and or a protein and or a cell and or an organ. And we're going to go through this step by fucking step.
So in other words, you're going to kick our asses tonight.
Pretty much.
Cool, man. That 5G thing scares the shit out of me, though.
Yeah, it's a weapon system, dude.
It really does scare the shit out of me.
It's a medical. I'll rephrase that. It's a medical system.
I hear you.
It's a medical system. So that's really what the real fight's over.
It's scary, man.
Yeah. So,
but got to be informed. I love it. Thank you for that.
Stick around.
I will.
If not, I'm going to download this one and upload it on my own channel fairly quickly. The next few, I'm going to try to download and upload real quick because there's a progression to this, and we're going to deviate and then come back to center and then deviate and come back to center. And it is my intent to illustrate to you how they're able to read and write and manipulate any organ, any cell in your body that they want. And they can do it all with the new technology that's currently deployed, hashtag ultra wideband and infrared lasers. And there's other ways to do it, but these are what I've been studying. So that's what I'm going to show you over the next few weeks. So last show, we talked about the satellite network going up. We talked about the investigative report from the French Army Reserve officers on COVID-19, its relationship to SARS-CoV-2, and we listened to a guy talk about endosomes and exosomes and how they're kind of the same thing. And any waste or any toxin that your cell excretes, they create an endosome and it excretes it as an exosome. And he did studies that showed basically it's the same genetic code as what they're calling coronavirus, which is why the PCR tests are crap. In addition to cranking up the number of times they regenerate or amplify the test in a PCR test so they can make anybody test hot for COVID. And then we looked at the executive order establishing the assessment of foreign participation in the telecom sector in the United States. And we looked at Project Blackjack with DARPA and the satellite grids and this idea that they're going to have a group of satellites that can basically ride on top of any other satellite, create their own secure networks, and be able to operate autonomously for up to 30 days. We also looked at how 5G millimeter wave radiation can get in and start to resonate your DNA, which is what this little picture in the lower right corner is here. Your DNA makes a number of different types of pickup coils that can be quote unquote tuned into. So that was last episode. That's episode 100. We're going to do 101 tonight. And this guy, Charles Morgan, talks about the psychoneurobiology in war. Psychoneurobiology in war. And this was delivered at West Point, 17 April 2018.
MWI speaker event for the few that can make it. Today we have Dr. Charles Morgan coming to talk to us about neuroscience and psychology and a whole gamut of things. Right now he is a professor of national security studies at the University of New Haven. His focus is teaching national security studies, domestic and international intelligence analysis, and issues in deception. Dr. Morgan is developing a concentration in the human aspects, intelligence analysis, and psychological operations arenas that are relevant to the intelligence community. He has a pretty robust background with military folks, doing research at SEER School, helping with selection processes for Special Operations Forces down at Fort Bragg, et cetera, et cetera. So, without further ado, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Actually, I was a Navy guy. I wasn't Army, but I've done more work with the Army, I think, over all these years than I ever did with the Navy. So what I would like to talk to you a little bit about today is something I was asked to do in 2010 and 2011. I was getting ready to leave over at the CIA, where I'd worked for a number of years, and the Intelligence Science Board said, could you give us a brief on what's in store for us in the future? I was like, I don't know, predicting the future is really hard. So I told my boss at the time, I said, well, I think the best I'll do is make an estimate over what I think is going to happen in the next 5 years, given certain technologies that were being developed at the time. And this is a bit of an extension of that. I presented it to the SSG, and it was some information I think some people didn't know, and I think it's good for people to be aware of what's going on out there. The one thing that makes predicting a little bit of the future easier when you look at biomedical science is that labs are working fairly systematically with overtly stated goals. So if you think about it, science is not really done in a haphazard way. It takes time, preparation. You have to test multiple hypotheses, develop techniques. So it is not really rocket science to look at a lab and say, this is where they're going, and here are probably two of the Achilles heel points in the design, but if they surmount those, they will probably achieve what they say they want to do. So that's a little bit of what this is about. I was going to give you my thoughts on mind, body, and beyond, gene slicing, the Dr. Ventnor's work, DNA encryption, and something about memory, that the past is not what it used to be. What I'd like you to consider for a minute is that one of the things that most people have a hard time understanding is that there is a difference between our mind and our body. Your personal experience is usually of an integrated operating system since the time you were little. However, there has been a plan in many labs to figure out how do we help people whose bodies don't work in the way that they want them to do, who have neurologic defects. Could you start the first video? So as a way of surmounting that, people are experimenting 5 or 6 years ago, or as early as 2008,
instant by instant basis.
With whether or not you can do a brain-robotic interface. I don't know if there's volume for that.
That we go through with our monkeys as they go through and try to learn how to use this robot. So they're using brain signals, so signals from their motor cortex that we pull out of wires into our system, and our computers then decode what it is that the monkey's intending to do and drive the endpoint of this arm forward and backward and around through space. The monkeys have brain control over this robotic arm to move it forward and grab a piece of fruit as it's presented and then bring it back to their mouth to feed themselves.
Incredible as it may seem, these monkeys learned to feed themselves with a robot arm that was being directly controlled by their brains, as if it was simply part of them.
This is a biofeedback, closed-loop kind of experiment, and that there's an automatic, almost an automatic learning that's going on, where we're communicating with the.
So essentially, when you're little and you're growing up and you're learning how to work your appendages, you are making good motor neuron connections and inhibitory connections. And what they're able to do back in 2008 with a primate is have it learn through trial and error that by thinking, it can move a robotic arm and feed itself. It didn't take too long for the neural interface issue to be resolved once people figured out you could implant electrodes on brain tissue and then take a biological signal and turn it into an electrical signal and amplify it. It took a little while for the monkeys to figure out how to do it. Early on, they would give it a little joystick, so it was like playing a video game. And pretty soon, the monkeys, actually there's a chimp that's done it as well, she figured out she just didn't need to use the little joystick and could just think about it. And then the arm would move, and the monkey would begin to experiment and would think about where it wanted the arm to go. So it was learning, I have a new appendage. The same is true in people. As you can see, just 4 years later, we see it being done in humans. You can start that for me, please. With people who have neurologic injury and can't use their limbs. Ooh, I don't know if it'll play. Yeah, try and hover over the screen, I think. There we go. Oh, drag it down. There you go. Perfect. Yeah, it's right there.
My life has changed dramatically since the accident. As of right now, there's nothing to cure paralysis, besides maybe a miracle. The first thing I'd do if I get my arms back, I would hug my daughter. It'd be really nice to scoop something up in a spoon and feed myself again. This is going to go beyond spinal cord if this works. This is going to go MS. This is going to go stroke. This is huge. This is millions and millions and millions of people. I'm pretty much broken from the neck down, I guess you could say. The only thing that I have left that is untouched is my brain. And obviously, I'm able to use it very good. I'm able to do this and do that. No memory loss, no nothing. So I opted for an experimental surgery to go at the one thing that I still have.
What we try to do is put a grid in place that's capable of recording signals from the brain. So when you think I want to move, there's actually electrical impulses in the brain. We want to be able to record those electrical impulses and then decode what the electrical impulses mean and use that to control an object or an arm. People have thought for a long time that we might be able to tap into the brain, but it's only recently that we've gotten closer and closer. There's some great work going on here at the University of Pittsburgh by a gentleman named Andy Schwartz. And Andy has shown that he can get a monkey to control a robotic arm with an amazing degree of freedom by thought.
So we've developed technology where we can implant an array of electrodes, microelectrodes, in the cerebral cortex of monkeys. And we can record activity from many neurons in the brain simultaneously. And from that signal, we can extract the monkey's intention to move its arm. And now that we have that, we can intercept that signal and use it, instead of moving the monkey's own arm, to use it to move a prosthetic arm.
Just 2 weeks. I think he said it actually.
What it takes to get into people is a large team. So we've basically been somewhat isolated in our laboratory, working on monkeys, proving the technology, just making discoveries, validating the technology, developing new ways of doing this. And what we've been able to do recently is pass a lot of this knowledge that we've gained to clinical colleagues. They came to the laboratory, learned a lot of what we're doing, and then took it back to the clinic and developed the technology that's appropriate for humans.
We were implanting our first patient in a clinical trial to place self-dural grids or electrodes on the surface of the brain in an attempt to use them as a brain-computer interface with the ultimate goal of controlling a prosthetic arm. And we'll start out simply with trying to do some cursor control, hoping that over the 28 days that he's implanted, that we will be able to progress to potentially being able to control a robotic arm.
2 days after the surgery, we plugged me in and started to basically train my brain, train the computer to my brain the way I'm thinking. The computer doesn't know up, down, left, right, it just knows the signals that I'm thinking. For the first couple of days, it was just, what's up, what's down? How I do it is I look at the ball at the top, and through my peripheral vision, I see the ball that's moving. So I'm focusing on the target. And almost with my peripheral, if I want to go up, I'm with my mental eyes, or whatever you want to call it, lifting up, trying to get that ball to go up or trying to get it to go down. So I'm focusing on the target while watching the moving ball with my peripheral. It's like a one-player video game. I'm trying to beat my own score because there is a score. There's a certain percentage. It's out of 6. Each time I do it, it's out of 16 balls, if you want to say. And I want to know that number. If it's 13, I want the 14, or I want the 15. And so it's just a challenge to myself. One thing I found out that if I focus too hard, it doesn't work right. It has to be very natural.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, not too bad.
We're making such ground on this every single day. Every other day, we're just going leaps and bounds. And knowing that we're doing that, if I had another week or 2 weeks or a month, where would we be then? We'd be. We've already done stuff that's unprecedented. I've been doing stuff. I've been told that with the 3D curse control, people have been doing it for a year, 2 years. That they haven't got the type of control and percentages that I've gotten in a day, literally a day. The highlight was 45 minutes ago. I got to use a robotic arm for the first time, and we got to reach out and touch somebody for the first time in 7 years.
So what you see is people struggled with how to get the electrodes on the surface of the brain, how to do the brain learning. The computer algorithms have improved. This is by trial and error as it begins to recognize what the subject's brain is doing. But after that, if you look at that as a scientific development in medicine, you can quickly see the possibilities that emerge, right? They're playing with motor function and linking it to thought. So the next step, really, when you think about it, was to simultaneously try it with another non-human animal and find out if she could run a robot on the other side of the planet. And the essence of this experiment is, at first she had to walk on the treadmill to keep the robot walking that she could observe on the computer screen, and then she just stopped walking and it would run the robot in Japan. So you can have a brain here in the United States plugged in, running a robotic device, a mechanical device, via the internet somewhere else in the world. So that was pretty cool. It also has some fun implications. If you see now, where do you imagine this going when you think of it as an offensive or defensive opportunity with respect to the intelligence community? The natural segue then would be, if I can send motor function from a brain to a mechanical arm, is it possible to send motor functions from one human to another human? So I call it the possession experiment. Oh, I think it's that one, yeah. Just have to hover the, there you go, right there. Oh.
For our weekly tech report. Now, do you know the phrase brain power? Well, it turns out that scientists at the University of Washington are trying to hone that power and transmit it to another brain. Researchers call it direct brain-to-brain communication, and they do it by passing a signal from one mind to the next, using the internet nonetheless. So does it sound a little sci-fi, Star Trek mind meld, Jedi mind trick Inception-esque to you? Well, it did to me too. So I brought one of the researchers onto the show to tell me how it works. Dr. Andrea Stocco is an assistant research professor at the University of Washington, and he told me why this concept is not as weird as it sounds.
It's not so science fiction. We use currently existing technologies to read the brain patterns in a person and to transmit them to a different person. And we can only do it with very simple impulses right now, like motor commands to control the hand, for instance. So it's not that science fiction. It was definitely possible years ago. It's just that we were the first to try it.
Sure. So can you go into a little bit more detail about how specifically it works, or what you need from the person, and also what you need from wireless internet to make it come together?
Yes, it works more or less like this. A person is sitting on a chair, and we call this person the first brain or the sender, and is connected to an EEG cap. The EEG cap detects electrical activity all around the brain and is capable of recognizing when the brain patterns are those that a person produces when he's trying to move the right hand or is thinking about moving the right hand. These brain patterns are interpreted by a computer who then controls a second computer who is connected over the internet, and the second computer controls a stimulating coil that produces a magnetic field, and it's the magnetic field that is eventually directed over the head in such a way as to reproduce the particular command in a selected part of the brain. In this case, the part of the brain that controls the right hand. The wireless connection enters only in the communication between the two computers. The two computers can be in the same room and connected physically, or they can be in any part of the world and talking to each other through the internet.
So you can watch the video, but essentially what's happening is when one person is playing the video game, they're not using their hands. They're simply looking at targets. What's going on in the other room is a transcranial magnetic stimulation device that creates a magnetic field that excites neurons, and it's the other man's hand that begins to move and hits the targets. So you've co-opted the portion of a body of another human, and then their hand can behave in the way that you want it to do. His goal, you'll see later if you download the video, is he would like to have a cap that you could put on and have a surgeon direct your hands to do battlefield surgery or something somewhere else in the world where they don't have a doctor who has the technical skills. You can put on the cap and your hands become an extension of that expert's body. The fine motor skill manipulation at that point in time was not great, but the person on the receiving end described the sensation as rather odd. Said, I didn't know anything until I saw my hand beginning to move, and felt that it was something other. And its hand was moving, the hand could punch in a code, the hand could do a number of things. But the really fun part was that you're taking over somebody else's physical body with the mind of another human. So what do you think would be the next step? You follow medical research, you say you can make a robot move, you can make a human hand move. What would you do next? You say, wow, they're getting brains connected to run things. You have to begin to think either like doctors or like security and intelligence people, right? Can you actually send and receive sensory information like the Matrix? I'll show you a little bit of this experiment. The short answer is yes.
We were able to transmit brain-derived information from one rat to another, and basically got this pair of animals collaborating to solve tactile and motor tasks. There's a behavior box where the first animal is located, and this animal is called the encoder because he's the one who does all the work. He's basically using his forepaws or his whiskers to perform either a motor or a tactile discrimination task. And while he's doing that, we are monitoring its behavior and recording the brain activity that is being produced by this animal's brain and transmitting in real time all these electrical signals to a second animal that is called the decoder. Well, this animal has the lucky job of not having to do anything for getting a reward. The only thing it has to do is to receive this brain activity into its own brain and then decode the pattern of information that the encoder has generated and indicate to us through behavior what it is that the first animal has discovered out there in the environment. So if the decoder gets it right, both animals get a nice juicy reward. And that's what they want. And that's how they collaborate to actually get this job done. Here you see in the next slide, encoder animal waiting for a light stimulus that tells the animal which of two levers he has to press to get a little bit of a water sip. And the light says either press left or the right lever. So when the animal gets the light and is about to press the lever, we record the activity, electrical activity from lots of cells in the motor cortex of this animal and instantaneously transmit this information through the brain of a second animal that is in another box and cannot see the light and cannot see what the first animal is doing. This is the decoder, and he's receiving this information through very tiny little pulses of electrical activity that are delivered to the homologous part of the brain that the encoder is using to solve the task. So as the decoder gets this information and basically decodes the brain pattern originated in the encoder's brain, it responds to us behaviorally by pressing one or the other lever to tell us that he got it right or not.
So it took some learning trials, but not many. It took 75 between them to achieve an accuracy rate of over 85% in just training the rats for a little while in the cages. But this was a milestone because it was not simply using the motor cortex to run a device. This was actually having one animal learn something and seeing and recording that activity and put it into the sensory cortex of the second animal, and that animal acquires the knowledge. It is able to act on the knowledge from the experience for something it has not ever done, which is really fun when you think about it. Would this facilitate language learning? Would this let you upload information when you don't know how to operate a device? Does it serve well for covert communication? This is done between two rats. What we do know is that DARPA did get permission for 500 operations to do deep brain electrode implants. They haven't published anything yet, but my guess is what you're looking at is human-human thought transference, and certainly in the open science world, that was published last month. actually the brain-to-brain transfer of sensory information in 2 humans, and they achieved a success rate of being right 85% of the time. So you can attach one human brain to a device. You can attach the human brain to another human brain. You can direct motor activity, or you can send communication and information. What we know from the training trial data so far is that it probably requires it'll probably require a training trial between people as well. And we don't know from an encryption and encoding standpoint whether everybody's communication would follow the same patterns or not. It may be that 2 people have to train and then it's unique, and then you have a decryption problem for someone if they decide they can intercept the signal, right? That would be, but you could plug in somewhere else in the world and learn something or see something or have somebody acquire the information that you have, and you wouldn't have to carry a different device. So that's what people are doing. There's a whole world out there of biohacking. I don't know if you're aware of it, but you should be. So normally at the university, we are well regulated by the federal laws about studying and experimenting on humans. There's a biohacking community that is not part of the official science community that is busy trying to attach hardware to humans, and they do it in their basements. They study up on how to do the surgeries, how to connect devices, how to put motherboards in people. And they may use it for some purposes like fishing, using RFID signals in their hands to take information from you. But there are some other interesting developments. When you start thinking about the fluidity of what you can do with the brain, they're experimenting with CE6 and giving people with eye drops night vision. For several hours, a person receiving the night drops can see over 160 feet in the dark. So it's a lot easier to look through your own eyes than it is to put on nods. And it will be a short time before you get a better solution than we get from the biohacking community, but it could also be readily available to almost anybody on the planet. It's going to be harder to keep this under control than it is to keep the special lenses and night vision technology. So I think it's really important that people pay attention to this kind of a thing, because that can give humans the natural ability for a while to see in the dark.
Hope you're listening.
The other new possibility coming along is that seeing in the dark is something you don't really naturally do that well. But with animals, we've been able to achieve a number of other things, one of which is giving them an extra sensory ability, if you will. I'll show you a short clip. People decided they wanted to know if they could give the rat an ability to do something it does not naturally have.
Recently, researchers have given rats an implant which allows the animal to obtain, as they call it, a sixth sense. The laboratory subjects were able to search and detect infrared lights, which is an exceptional accomplishment given that rats cannot normally see infrared lights. A team at Duke University placed infrared detectors, which were wired up to tiny electrodes into the part of their brains that processes tangible information. A source involved with the experiment, Eric Thompson, states, "This is the first paper in which a neuroprosthetic device was used to augment function, literally enabling a normal animal to acquire a sixth sense." Researchers claim that the device could also help humans regain sight if placed in the appropriate part of the brain. Last year, researchers used a computer chip-ridden prosthetic system to help transmit light signals in the brains of mice. The minds behind the study hope to move on to human trials using the retinal device to restore sight to those who had lost their vision.
So people are playing with chemicals to enhance the human capacity. They're also experimenting now with how do you add a device to the mammalian brain to give it an extra sensory ability. You may not want to detect infrared. You might want to have a room temperature detector of radiation, depending on what your job is in life. So when you think about it, the possibility now is there to develop different kinds of devices. They could be perhaps used either by intelligence people or by people in the military to have an extra ability to be able to see through walls, to see heartbeats. We used to play with the 18 gigahertz microwave detectors where we could pick up heartbeats through anything but solid steel and water, but that could easily be a human who can see the unique heartbeat that's behind the wall over there that's thermal insensitive. So it doesn't have to be IR. It can be a number of things. Anything that you can co-opt is theoretically now possible to adapt to human brain functioning. All you'd have to learn is the code. You'd have to train with it. It might not be natural at first. You might not understand the signal you're getting, but you can add to human brain function. You can also use it to intercept signals. The experiment that was just released this last month, as I said, demonstrated that people could transfer knowledge from one human to another. And I commented to a couple of my colleagues, and I said, I think right now the most direct application of that is going to be either covert communication or running drones. The set of experiments, I didn't have videos to show you, but there have been a series that have shown you can connect the human brain to a rat and control its motor movement and its tail. So you can have non-human animal drones. You can have the human brain probably run a regular drone at this point, but running a non-human drone, something like a cockroach or a rat, would be awesome. And now if you were watching the Olympics and you see the coordinated maze of drones, the software is now really readily available where you could have hordes of little creatures that can gain access to facilities or move around in different places, all run by a person sitting in a booth. It's no more technically challenging once you do that than figuring out the logistics of how you're going to send your signal somewhere else in the world and how to protect that signal. But that's now. That's not in the future. So as you begin to think what's in 5 years, the interfaces are going to become more delicate, more refined, and as transcranial magnetic stimulation, it's a rather crude instrument right now. It creates a field that excites just hordes of neurons. But as they refine the technology so you can get a better point specificity to the neurons you actually want to activate, you should be able to do this without penetrating the skull. Either someone could wear a cap, and in fact, that's how the latest brain-to-brain communication in humans was done. It was done without surgery and actually signaling via some stimulation to the retina and the brain decoding it. Although the person consciously didn't know what the code was, the brain did. So that I would recommend people becoming aware of that from the human drone technology standpoint. The second field that people may or may not be aware of, I always tell my students, I said I wasn't around when they developed atomic weapons, but Dr. Ventnor's work is, my view, the equivalent of the development of nuclear weapons when you realize that he created life in a cell back in 2010. I don't know if people are familiar with his work, but this technology paired with something called CRISPR, which is like an editing software for genes, makes a number of things immediately available. What he did is he programmed yeast cells to produce anything he wanted. They can produce perfume, they can produce petroleum, they can produce any peptide, anything we program the DNA to do, and it's in the living cell. Right, so in medicine, the goal in medicine now is to be able to do designer medicine and therapy. If we can design a cell to get into your body and release the right product for you, you won't be losing half the drugs you take through your liver when you swallow a pill and it gets digested. These can be inserted into you through the hypospray needles, almost like Dr. McCoy on Star Trek, giving you a hypospray. It just blasts now plasmids into your squamous cells. But Ventnor was able to do that and has the patent on the technology. But you can engineer anything. You can engineer a unique thing that would only kill one person in the world. It's how it's done. You put in a specific gene slicing, you program what you like, you put it in the cell, and it can reproduce and make as much as you like. For those of you who don't know, your DNA is usually all wrapped up in tight little coils. And so what you're doing is when they create plasmids and put them into cells, it sends a signal and tells which portion of the DNA should unwrap, unfold, and produce a product. Now, this is the future of medicine. When you look at this technology in medicine and say, this is going to be done to help people, right? We want to be able to give them medicines. We actually want to correct for genetic deficits. If a kid's born with a genetic anomaly, with the CRISPR technology, the feeling is we can create the portion of the gene they're missing and go have it spliced back in. And that may help a child, either if it's in utero development or once they're older, to have the missing substance actively produced. What would you do with this if you were in security and intelligence? Well, you can do a number of things. You could decide, if you make this gene, we know that certain people in the world who function at very high altitudes very, very well do it because they had a special mutation in their genome that we don't have because we didn't grow up in the Himalayas. But they can function at very high altitudes. Could you give this to people who are going to have to do warfighting in high altitudes and they don't require extra support? Their body makes a much more efficient use and can work under conditions of lower oxygen than the rest of us. You start letting your mind wander. Can it also produce a substance that lets you function longer underwater without oxygen? So, but these are run by certain mutations in genes, and with CRISPR, we have the ability to actually make these and see what happens when we give them to animals, non-human or human animals, that don't have it naturally. You could have the Forrest Gump gene. You guys have been tracking. There's a gene that just makes you stronger. I would say that most of this technology is probably going to be employed by a state and not non-state actors because it's quite technical. But I say that with a caveat. When we studied Shinrikyo, if people remember, they had both uranium mines and regular laboratories where they experimented on both animals and had a whole series of laboratory experiments to develop the different kinds of gases that they wanted. Their goal was to actually mine uranium and probably come up with their own version of a nuclear weapon. But they recruited scientists, PhD level folks, and their goal was to be the rightful people running the country of Japan. But we can't assume that just because they're non-state actors, they will not make use of some technology around this. Related to this is an idea called DREADS. These are designer receptors that can be remotely controlled. So think about it for a moment. You can create a designer receptor, you can create a cell, you can put it somewhere in the body, and you can remotely activate it when the brain's exposed to the right signal. Using this technology, people have been able to transfer memories from one fruit fly to another by signaling through a light stimulus into the retina. Right now, in most animals, it's done by putting a substance into their body that will actually activate the neuron in the way that you want it. So you have the capacity to create any product. As long as you know the DNA sequence, you can insert it into a living system, and you can remotely control it. So in medicine, we think about how we do that to help people, how we do to repair deficits. Other people are going to think about how do they do it to expand possibilities. Now, one of the challenges that we have is that when you create a cell and you put it in somebody's body, you have to figure out where you want it. What if you want it in their brain? Right? If you want it in their brain and you can't figure out, you don't want to do surgery to plant it in their brain, if I want a product produced in your brain that may affect the way you think, the way you act, one route to that is through stem cells. If you're a quick brush up on your biology, stem cells are cells, they call them God cells. They can turn into anything. They hold the potential, unlike other cells in your body, to become anything you want them to become. And they can go find their home in the body and park there and do the work that you'd like them to do. You can infuse them, and they will find their way into the brain. So once you know that the technology is there to edit, splice, and program a cell, and the technology currently exists to administer it to somebody and have it go park anywhere you program it to go park, proliferate, and do its function, you can have things activated in other people's brains. So if you take these three key points, hopefully you can see it opens up a number of both alarming and exciting possibilities. You can have the timed release of information on demand. Hopefully, when I mentioned the word CRISPR and word editing and creating molecules with CRISPR out of and playing with DNA, some of you thought encryption and encoding. So DNA encryption, there were, I think, 8 articles published by China in the course of 3 years, in the last 3 years. And it's quite important. The coding system, DNA steganography, I'll just say the short story on this is people have figured out how to hide imagery in the DNA of bacteria, and when you phosphoresce the bacteria, you can discover the information, or you can have those are just to remind me, you can have the information reproduced in a string form as a form of a protein. Dr. Church up at Harvard has shown quite well that you can store a lot of information in 1 gram of DNA. It's essentially, that many iPads in 1 gram at room temperature. no supercooling required. DNA is highly stable. It's been around on the planet a very long time. So between CRISPR, the storage capacity, and programming cells, the new way to hide information is going to be in DNA. The commercial application is going to be a bit like on Star Trek years ago. Why would you have a digital system when you can have a DNA system? You can store all the information you'd ever need, records, photos, anything. It's simply another way of storing information. It had just been so slow up until 5 years ago, it wouldn't be thought to be practical. But it is. This is the first experiment showing what imagery you can hide in bacteria. This is the latest. It's a GIF file. It was actually programmed into the DNA of bacteria. Last year, the bacteria reproduced, and the offspring from the reproduction cycle would still produce this movie. Pretty cool. You can hide information in bacteria, and when the bacteria multiply, they can go into a spore form and last for a very long time. No one can scan you and find a bacteria. We don't have anything that can detect that. When so if you want to be able to encode information, take pictures of information, create something in DNA and don't want it in your own body, it can be bacteria on some portion of your body, right? All they have to do is scrape it, let it grow in the Petri dish, and unpack the information. This is all available now. This isn't science fiction, but you can encode movies. Well, this is what the Chinese are doing with DNA. So in your own neck of the woods, you can begin inquiring. We are doing things with DNA as well, but the Chinese are fairly convinced that DNA encryption and encoding will be one tremendous challenge even for quantum computing. So this is where the race is right now, trying to merge quantum computing with what you'd call a wet hard drive with DNA. Merging DNA systems with quantum computing will be really quite an amazing and both lethal threat for that. The next thing I wanted to mention to you is memory. Can you play this one really quick? Hopefully you'll recognize this.
Hey, whoever you guys are, you're gonna have to show me some ID if you're gonna be in the... Hey, whoever you guys are, you're gonna have to... Hey, whoever you guys are,
Would you stop that? What? That thing is gonna give her brain cancer or something.
Hey, whoever you guys are, you're gonna...
So, what to do with memory? In medicine, we think of memory as a potentially harmful thing when people present with post-traumatic stress disorder. They can't stop thinking about the thing that's creating emotional distress. It's a very active development in the field to figure out, can we erase memory? Can we modify memory? Can we change memory? The short answer is yes. Several years ago, with the PKM-zeta data out of Duke University, this was the first time that anyone had ever demonstrated that if you wash an area of the brain called the hippocampus, it's an area of the brain that's crucial for forming short memories, spatial memories, and then facilitating the transfer from a short-term memory to something that's more permanent and stable over time, that he could train the mice to run the maze, document the number of trials and errors, and then flood their hippocampus or expose it to this, and the memory would be completely gone. Meaning when the rats or the mice had to learn it over again, it was the same number of learning trials. And there was no trace of the memory left. Now the good news for us when we study rats and mice is we put electrodes and cannulae into their brain and can directly affect that area of the brain. If you wanted to poke your own hippocampus, you'd have to stick your finger through your eye and go right back in there. Sounds impossible to get to. Not if you program a cell to go there. So if you decide you wanted to program something that would selectively release PKM-zeta, after your meeting with someone, they probably would have no memory of it. That's what's happening in the rats, right? So the technical challenge right now is, how do we get a cell in there to do that in a human? I can assure you they're working on that in non-human primates right now. How many, what's the point specificity? Can we get it in there close enough to the hippocampus? Will those cells start reproducing in the next day, make enough of that stuff to wipe out a memory? Related to this, once you start thinking about memory, are chemicals that not only wipe out memory, but chemicals that enhance it. So if you want a better human camera, a better, an individual who can just go see and remember everything, that's the direction that the research in this lane is taking to help people with Alzheimer's, how to give them memory back. So what's being actively studied are the few people on the planet who have hypermnesia. In other words, they remember everything that's ever happened to them. We're actively trying to understand how to unlock that and unpack that and figure out why it is their memory does seem to record and they retain everything they've seen. They don't find it pleasant, and medicine would like to, people in medicine want to try and understand that so they can turn it into something beneficial for people who are losing memory. From a security and intelligence standpoint, it is a really unique opportunity to begin to discover, can you administer a drug that enhances human memory for a certain number of hours? Does it have to be permanent? So rather than carrying technical toys somewhere to try and record and collect information, your brain just remembers it, which doesn't give anybody anything really to detect. So that's one potential use for it, and that is one lane of research that's going on. That was just my picture to remind me of The Man Who Knew Too Much. If you remember the old Hitchcock film, essentially that's what he'd done. Remember, is memorize all the steps on how to make a bomb. He'd remembered the codes, he'd remembered everything. That research on hypermemory has gone more slowly than I thought in 2010. I thought by about 2015 there would be some progress. There hasn't been much yet in expanding memory very much. It seems to be a harder nut to crack than erasing memory. Erasing memory seems to be far easier. The last topic I wanted to review with you is memory. I don't know if you recognize any of the imagery up there, but I'll walk you through it. With memory, in the last 5 years, what's been demonstrated is that you can train a fruit fly around an aversive experience, and you can transfer that memory to the brain of another fruit fly by manipulating the rods. And it gives it a memory for something that it's never had before, and then it reacts to the stimulus in the same way as the animal who did have the aversive learning experience. It's been done in mice. I'll talk a little bit about what Beth Loftus and I have done to men and women going through SEER school and changing memory. And I put the last slide up because this is in flatworms, and this came out 2 years ago, that memory really is something beyond what we typically understand in flatworms. You can cut their head off, and their body still remembers stuff. So they're just beginning to uncode or decode where and how is memory stored in the body of this little creature, so we can translate that into memory in animals that look different than that little creature. It's evolved it for a very interesting reason. So this is in 2009, using light, they've transferred memory. You can turn things on and off using light in animals to activate the hippocampus, turn memory on and off. And so where are we with humans in creating false memories, giving them memories that they've never had? We've come a long way. My colleague is Beth Loftus, and this was her early work. It was called Lost in a Mall. And what she did is she asked a person to be in the study. You could be in her study if you had a sibling that was at least 5 years older than you. And she'd say, we're interested in your memory from when you were a kid. I've asked your older sibling, your older brother or sister, to give me 4 stories about you, and I want to know how much you remember. What people didn't know is that there were 4 different stories. One of them was fake, and she wanted to see how long it would take for them to adopt a false memory. The quick answer is, after 2 interview sessions, 30% of the subjects believed that they remembered the person who'd found them when they were lost at a mall, and actually argued with the researcher about whether or not the memory was true or not. And that's how I met her, and we decided to get together and run up to Brunswick to SEER school and try a memory experiment. This is our design. If you're not familiar with SEER, there's a classroom phase, there's an experiential phase. We were interested in sampling people when they were in isolation, when they were returning their gear, and at the end. And we tried a couple of different techniques. Group 1, there's no misinformation. We simply want to sample accuracy of human memory for their experience And we told them at the beginning of SEER, we want you to be the best little human collector possible. We are going to quiz you about your memory. Don't let us trick you. We want to know what you remember. Group 2, we told them the same thing, but we lied. When they took their questionnaire at the end, we incorporated several techniques from false memory techniques, which are a little bit of leading questions to see whether or not we could create false memories. In the third group, we exposed them to an erroneous photograph of their interrogator. And in group 4, we used a video. So here's what we did. By exposing them to a photograph after they had been interrogated and placed in isolation stress, it could change them from this guy to this guy 48 hours later on who they would identify in the lineup. Their level of confidence was an 8 out of 10, that was the person they had met. We found out we could make them believe that there were guns, that there were knives, that there were caches of weapons, simply by altering the phrasing of a question or inserting something into a video. I'll give you an example. If we said, did your interrogator wear a weapon? If so, please describe it. We only got about a 2% endorsement of the presence of a weapon in the interrogation phase. If we said, when you were being interrogated by your interrogator and the guy with the weapon interrupted the interrogation, what did they argue about? We didn't care what the answer was. We'd ask another question. They'd describe the weapon worn by your interrogator. It jumped to 30%, would tell us the type of firearm that they had seen in the interrogation booth, which is a security violation, right? There weren't any. We got to record them. But with one question, we could do that. When you sample with a few more, you can actually increase the sample. So when we increased the stress at SEER, we found that instead of a 30% rate overall, we could create false memories in nearly everyone. That was in 900 people. So Beth and I were talking about that. We said, well, you can change memory. We know that. It's a way of understanding maybe why and how people have recovered memories of abuse that never happened. That's what her work has mainly been about. So she decided to do a study called Licked by Pluto. She decided she couldn't make Mickey Mouse a sex offender, but in her lab they thought Pluto was fair game. The short story is they were exposed to some misinformation about a man who had dressed in the Pluto outfit at Disney, and he'd been inappropriately rubbing his large fabric tongue on children, pleasurably and not pleasurably. There were 2 different conditions, and there was a neutral condition. If people adopted the false memory, and their memory was for something negative, they did not want to buy the Pluto toy, right? When they went down their list, what they would not buy. She's done it with food. That was from her series with Alan Alda. She gave him a false memory that he'd been sick one time eating deviled eggs. And here they offer him one at the picnic on film, and you get the classic disgust wrinkle, and he said, no, I got sick one time eating them. It's not a true memory, it was planted. She's done it now with strawberries and ice cream, also done it with pickles, and has done it with alcohol. A study last year was that if you give college students the false memory that they were terribly hungover, they had a wicked hangover from drinking too much tequila, then when they're given free range options at the bar, like a week later, they decline it at twice the rate of everybody else. They go, nah, I got sick doing that. So think about it. If you change the past, you change human behavior. We are a case-based reasoning animal. When we think about what we're going to do, we think about the last time we did something, or what we heard about, or what we think it would have done. So to change human motivation, we don't have to persuade people. You can just change their memory. Think about the defensive and offensive capabilities of that. If you think about this from a defensive standpoint, you have the ability to change the memory of a person who's been debriefed in a safe house about the identities of who they met, the layout, because we've looked at altering memory for floor plans, for faces, for timing. If they're wrapped up by their intelligence service, they don't have anything to lie about, or what they remember is actually genuine, but it's wrong. That might be a defensive way of applying the technique. In medicine, people are arguing about whether or not you can use false memories to help people. Can I give you a false memory that leads you to stop smoking, or is it unethical? Because I can't tell you I gave you a false memory. I'd have to do it outside of your permission for your good. Most of us think it's probably unethical. In the society we live in, we think you probably should be an informed consumer, but it's a possibility that you can do. And when I think about this, I think about its relevance in this day and age when you start wondering what information is real and what information is trustworthy. When you start running into people and debriefing them, and you have sources who claim things, when you can learn how to create false memories, a person can be genuine, and the information they remember is the old dangle idea. You can put information out that's simply not true. But in the current social media age, the ability to actually manage people's memories and change them is just enhanced compared to what it used to be. Now you can fix videos and pictures and expose people to audio and visual information, and we know that even if they know that's a possibility, people don't recognize when they adopt a false memory. It's a bit of a Trojan horse effect. You don't know that it's happened to you. And if you're smart and you have a good memory, you'll believe that happens to other people, but not you, because your memory is true. So it bypasses some critical reasoning on our part. And I think it's particularly effective. That's where the state of the art is right now for creating false memories in humans, is doing that verbally or by these manipulations with either what we say, what we show them, what we expose them to. But the chemical implanting of memories has now occurred in monkeys. So in trying to restore memory, there is probably, I would say in the next 2 years, we should see the science experiment come out that says a memory has actually been transferred or created and planted back into a human brain that wasn't done by a classic false memory technique. But I would anticipate that that's the direction the research is going. How do you rebuild memories in people who've had a TBI? Active research is going on about that on nanite reconstruction of brain cells and brain networks. And the idea in the mental health community is people lost part of their brain. We want to restore memory and brain function. Can we put the memories back in? So it's probably only science fiction for another 2 years, given the state of the art and the progress around that. And then, and the last thing I'll say, I didn't have any videos for it. I really wanted to show you one, but the French have published a very interesting paper. And it is this. While people were sleeping, they were able to train them and sample their knowledge in what they trained them in while they were asleep and while they were later awake and didn't know that they'd learned the information. So I'll say it again. In people who were asleep, they were able to tell what people knew around word recognition lists without ever waking the person up. They were also able to train new memory and information outside the person's awareness while they were asleep. Where that technology can go is some very interesting places. It would really raise, since I was in the lane of DS&T and we talked about deception and everybody was arguing about how to interrogate people, it raises an immediate question about whether or not you can sample information in people's brains outside of their awareness. The problem with a CAT scan and a PET scan and any technology is you have to have a willing subject. They do need to sit still. If people are asleep and you can begin to sample what their brain recognizes, it offers a number of opportunities at looking at guilty knowledge, brain recognition waveforms, and sampling some kinds of information. I don't know how soon it will be when you can link someone's brain to somebody else's while they're asleep, but I would imagine that that can't be far off. I'd probably ballpark it and say probably 5 years. If they have to do the brain implants, we'll know sooner, because I can't see any other reason why DARPA got approval for 500 deep brain implants. I think the next step is going to be a hive brain. It's already been done in rats. You can link multiple brains, and as a hive, they solve problems much faster than the individual rat. So that technology is here. I'm assuming they'll link people who've given permission to link their brains to have a productive life, live in virtual reality, move robotic things. They can probably problem solve. So I think in the next few years, that's what we'll see, is brain-to-brain linking for problem solving, but to see if it makes it more efficient. But those are a couple of technologies I wanted to make you aware of, and then you can run away and think about their more direct applications. I tend to think of things from a medical perspective and from an intelligence and information perspective, but it's no longer really science fiction, and most of these fields have moved faster than I actually thought in 2010. The only one has been expanding memory that hasn't moved as fast. But I thought I would share that with you, and that's all I had to say. So thank you for your time. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Dr. Morgan. We're pretty much out of times, but we'll be hanging out up here for a little bit, so if anybody has questions, feel free to come up, and thank you for coming out.
See you.
Let's pull that off.
All right, so here we go. We're gonna look at some of what this guy said, because you could spend hours looking at what this guy said. So I want to show you some of the stuff that I'm researching and how it ties into what it is that this guy was talking about. And again, I want to refresh that last show went over satellites going up, DARPA getting involved with being able to override satellites and control them. We know they're going up for 5G. This idea of your DNA being a resonant antenna, basically, and the obvious focus with the United States and other countries as it relates to the importance of telecommunications and national security. Why? Because the idea here really is networking people onto the internet and doing so in a variety of ways, biologically, with silicon, and I use that term generally, and or just using directed energy systems, directed energy being light, sound, and electromagnetics. And if you think this is not possible, well, you just listen to a guy address a group of Army officers at West Point, going through item by item by item what is here and what is on the horizon, which means it's already here behind the scenes, because this obviously was pulled from the public domain. This was put up on YouTube. So these discussions are being had and deemed unclassified. Imagine what the classified discussions are. Just imagine. And we don't get those, so we can only infer. And so what I want to show you now and next show and the show after, as much as I can stay focused, to put together comprehensively what is being done specifically with electromagnetics. And then we're going to take a break from that and look at some more bioelectronics, where they're actually going to grow conductive material in your cells to replace and or create electronics using cellular functions, growing this stuff in your body and then connecting it, just like the ways you kind of heard about right now. So this guy took you through a series of where the technology was with the robotics, and you got to have surgery. And now, we're getting to the point now where you don't even need surgery anymore. It can be done in a very sophisticated manner. So this document is a HUAWEI document, and it talks about human bond communication. This was delivered in 2017 at the European Innovation Day. And this particular talk was discussing this idea of human bond communication as it relates to transmitting sensory information over the internet up to and including emotions, and this idea that 5G is really the ground platform, the ground architecture, base architecture that will be used moving forward in time. Wireless world in 2050 and beyond. So it's going to be 5G and then on to 6G and on and on and on. But 5G really opens up the bandwidth to start having dynamic, high resolution brain-computer interfaces. And so we're going to breeze through some of these because there's a lot of information to get to. This represents a basic architecture, right, for human bond communication. You sense something, whatever it is, could be anything. In this case, it's a plant of some type. You digitize it, send it over the internet, and then you put it into a human. This is the sense of taste. It could be the sense of touch, smell, anything, exchange of sensory information. And something like this is very easy to do at this point with a wearable, like a watch or headphones, because you have a way to stimulate nerves in the skin and many other things with electrodes directly applied to the skin. And that's done with, it can be done with any type of electrode with a computer attached to it. So you've got headphones, watches, and other technologies that we've looked at in depth on this show. And we will again, coming up very shortly. So basic, right? Exchanging the sense of taste, perhaps even the sense of touch of what that plant would feel like in your mouth. HUAWEI. partnering with a doctor who is spearheading this whole thing, a European person, Ramjeet Prasad. And here it is: future wireless communications, human bond communication, feeling identification and transmission. How are you feeling? Your emotions, and transmitting it over the internet and putting it into another human. And this is the definition of human bond communication. This is the commercial version of this technology that they're selling. Huawei is selling this, openly disclosing, openly selling this. And this was back in 2017 when this presentation was delivered. And this statement was made in 2014 by the gentleman who, I guess, has been picked to sort of spearhead this and roll it out. Human bond communication is a novel personal network concept that has the capability to express and transform all the 5 human senses: see, touch, taste, hear, smell. All 5 senses, translating them into the information domain, digital ones and zeros, so that it can be transmitted and received like any other existing data being exchanged today. So here's a diagram of emotions. Can you imagine having artificial or synthetic emotions injected into your nervous system? Just wait. I'll show you exactly what I mean. And this idea of, being in your house and exchanging full sensory information, full controlled, all sensory and emotional hallucinations, controlled hallucinations, virtual reality. But if it's ported directly into the nervous system and the brain, you would clinically, in my opinion, clinically classify that as a hallucination. So it is a controlled, intentionally induced, active, real-time hallucination whereby you don't need goggles. The stuff is just put into your nervous system. And what do I mean by that? Well, this document is an extraction from this patent in Israel. It's a United States patent, world patent. Jerusalem has a patent. Japan, excuse me. And Israel has a patent. It's all the same patent. These are patented in different countries, right? Method and system for determination of physiological conditions and emotional states. And this talks about using millimeter waves, extremely high frequencies, 5G band, right? To understand what's going on with you emotionally and physically, and then being able to change your emotions and your physical state to correct things like a cold or a flu. You invert that and it can be due to things like induce a cold or a flu, or induce depression or correct depression. And it talks about using the skin to do it. Talks about electromagnetically interacting with the skin. So if you remember, we kind of got into this idea of DNA and passing through the skin or interacting with the skin with the COVID-19 5G and basically being able to do stuff with your skin. We covered that document on the last show, episode 100. And so we're going to get into a patent that kind of breaks that down a little bit more. So future wireless systems for human bond communication. This is a document. These are all linked in the show notes. So if you haven't clicked on the show notes, get it. You can look at this stuff yourself. Hope you like to read because it's a lot. And it really talks about the architecture that's needed. And what the architecture is going to do is create exchanges between all 5 senses, put them in a wireless format, transmit them over the internet, and put them into another human. And this will be for sale. Translate the subject into human sensing domains. Human sensing domains. And so what it gets at here, 5G communication, next-gen wireless systems, which is defined as 5th generation, will be ubiquitous ultra-broadband network enabling future internet. Described in it will enable full, immersive, 3D experience enriched by contextual information and anything or everything as a service. Anything or everything as a service, which means this stuff will be stored in the cloud. You will be stored in the cloud, and when you need to feel or think or have a sensation of a certain kind of way, your database will be accessed, and a unique brainwave profile will be then transmitted into your brain and your nervous system, and you will have some type of a fully immersive, controlled hallucination otherwise known as augmented reality or virtual reality of the future. This is what this is saying. And it's all being converted into ones and zeros so it can run over the internet as we understand it. But there will be a congruent internet, an additional side-by-side internet created. It is the quantum internet that we are going to get into at another time. After the adoption of 5G systems, a revolution in information and communication technologies field can be envisioned. In the framework of the human bond communication system, transmitting all 5 senses and your emotions over the internet, the traditional communication service such as voice and video telephony will be enriched by specific information seducers, is what they're calling them, exchanging your senses into something that can be transmitted as an electrical or electromagnetic signal, a seducer. So they're talking about the need for bandwidth and throughput. So all the advertising you see about, oh yeah, 4K video in 2 seconds, la-di-da, yeah, okay. Well, this can also be done. The throughput with 5G, 1,000 times more in the aggregate, 10 times more at the link level, 10 times more. So right now, 4G plus, whatever it's called, you can get, what, 50 megs, 100 megs, so 10 times more. They're looking at a gig, 1 gig in a single link. Well, your phones now have MIMO in them and like 4x4 stack antennas. So if each antenna can handle a gig, you could potentially get 4 gigs to something like your phone. Well, imagine what they can do straight to your brain or your body if they can overlap multiple beams from these unique targeting systems that are going to be the 5G antennas, where they can have what they call 3D beamforming. And what that is instead of just being angled in one direction and being able to generate a beam, they can actually steer the beams up, down, left, right, and control their power. So they can control the amount of power inside the beam at the same time. And we'll get into that when we start looking at electromagnetic weapon systems, because that's how they, destroy electronic systems, or that's how they would disrupt or jam radar. There are patents out there that discuss being able to concentrate electromagnetic energy and then to actually create more powerful electromagnetic energy as the energy moves away from an antenna. And what that has to do, I'm saying all this because it's illustrative of being able to manage the power inside of a beam. And that is what this technology 5G is advertising, is massive MIMO and complex three-dimensional beamforming in order to allow for more users and higher throughputs with a minimum amount of footprint. 1 millisecond or less latency. Well, your brain, when it fires an action potential, it's 250 milliseconds for your heart, for a heart action potential, because your heart is electric. 1 millisecond is their minimum standard for 5G. So faster than what is needed. And ultra high reliability. That's why they're going up every 800 feet, so that they're everywhere, suitable for a seamless experience, and 10 times longer battery lifetime. Yeah. Depends on where you are in the network. So this is a document that discusses the use of wireless networks, 5G body area networks, which is when you get down to the device level, your phone, and what your phone can do with all the other appliances and all your other peripheral devices, creating a command and control single computer that directs and steers and understands all the other antennas, your connected Wi-Fi router, your connected stove, your connected television, your connected thermostat, your connected cameras, your connected headphones, your connected Bluetooth speaker, your anything that has an antenna will become part of a local area network or a wireless body area network, depending upon how far away you are from it, and they will be used. And Google has patents for this, where they can use anything in a nearby area that the device is able to log into and communicate with. Google has patents that literally control the other devices and take over their radios and use them as radar sensors. And we're going to get into what radar can do on the next show. What radar can do with respect to potentially manipulating your brain and your body, altering your DNA and your cells, which I'll show you a little bit about today, and also being able to image at the same time and offer something like a thermoacoustic effect for what we understand is voice to skull technology. But the reality is that is creating ultrasound in the body, which I'll show you patents that illustrate how ultrasound in the body is able to manipulate cellular expression to do things like correct neurological disease and or treat cancer and or make cancer, depending upon how you want to look at it. So these are all on your phones today, just so you know, because 5G's here. It's been here for a year and a half now, and the devices have it. So we're going to get into that over the next few episodes. Wireless body area networks. I suggest you look that up. This is a basic example, what they're selling it as they're selling it to you as a medical application, right? Monitor and communicate remotely, alerts, medical staff, remote cloud storage, be able to locate where you are, social networks, everything's connected, right? The benefits of a wireless body area network. Instead of being measured face-to-face, patients' health-related parameters can be monitored remotely, continuously, and in real time. And I will show you documents about that from the FDA, where they look at medical software as a service to provide therapy. Software, according to the FDA, they have literature on it that they cite international documentation for medical software as a service. This is where we're going in this post-COVID dystopic mindfuck. So here's a basic on wireless body area networks. Obviously, these are things that be connected clothing, sensors that you wear, watches, headphones, implanted medical devices. We can go so far as to say nanotech, because we've covered that. Synthetic nanotech. You could look at Charles Lieber's stuff. He literally talks about creating cyborg cells by fusing radio transmitters at the nano scale into cells and creating little micro electronic circuits inside of a cell. I mean, that's what the guy worked on. And I'll show you stuff here in the next few weeks that talk about being able to grow biologic nanowires using synthetic biology. You can grow biologic nanowires so they in turn are conductive, and then you can begin to connect electronic circuitry just by growing this stuff in your cells. And if you don't believe me, just stay tuned, because this is coming up in the next few episodes. It's already in the show notes if you want to look ahead. It's already there. So some incentive for you to research, perhaps. Talks about security and resilience and blah, blah, blah. I encourage you to read this document. It's a pretty amazing. And here's the original human bond communication document, where it literally talks about being able to classify and quantify all 5 of your senses and put them into a digital form, transmit them over the internet. And what they're getting at in this diagram, you think, oh, it's not possible because it says right here it's not possible. Bullshit. I'll show you in a minute. These are waves. Sight and sound are already waves. So they're illustrating here that this is already possible. This can be done simply looking at a phone or a computer or whatever, right? You have speakers that emit sound waves. You have light that's coming out of your screen. So you get YouTube, or you get DLive, or you get whatever. The other stuff, they talk about you have to be close to be able to get these other things. Smell, taste, and touch. And so what I'm going to show you, if it's in here, if this cool little diagram is in here, it is. So here's a beautiful island retreat, because we're going to be too poor to go there ourselves. They'll just offer it to you where you sit on your couch. And it will have all of the sensations, the smell of the salt air, perhaps the sensation of the sand, the sun, whatever. Transmitted over the internet from the cloud. Look what this guy has. Looks like a smartwatch, doesn't it? Something on his wrist. And what it's getting at here is that you have a screen that's going to give you a speaker and light, optical and oral, and then you have smell, taste, and touch that are assimilated here, and it can be injected into your nervous system. And this is just what they're disclosing in this open source document. So we just listened to a guy talk about being able to interact with the brain, and he showed lots and lots of videos where they've been decoding the analog signals from the brain to be able to do things like fuse the brain with robotics and potentially create a hive mind, ultimately up to and including remotely steering and operating a human for covert applications, or to conduct covert warfare, and or to just have, fun and games with the sick elite fucks who like to take this technology that they think they own and do what they want with it. This is showing you that it can be done with something like a wearable, like a watch. And we've gone over that a lot. And we have a half an hour. So I'll show you very quickly. What I mean. Because we're looking at a watch, we'll stick with the watch, right? Very simply, we'll just stick with the watch. Go to humaninternet.org and you can look at this yourself. This is the patent for a dual EEG, no contact monitor, right? And it's literally talking about being able to transmit your thoughts over the internet or Wi-Fi using something like a watch. And it literally gets into, here's the patent for real. It's not just some picture I drew or found. Like, this is a real patent. This guy worked for NASA or provided technology to NASA, and he's now, for the last few years, consulting with Silicon Valley in California and other places. This thing literally talks about being able to inject neural code. Okay, so can permit communication between two people wearing a device according to this disclosure. For example, the sender brain, person 1, can emit a neural signal, hello, which has been interpreted through an algorithmic function. They're taking the analog brain wave and they're converting it with an algorithm, transmitting it over the internet, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, the internet, or the like, to a separate person, person 2, wearing a receiver, like a watch. The receiver device can then use digital signal processing to re-encode the digitized information as a neural message that is then injected into person 2's peripheral nervous system. Okay, so you got this cool little watch, smell, taste, and touch, and there is an open patent in public from a guy who is working in Silicon Valley, used to work for NASA, or provided technology to NASA, discussing injecting neural code into your nervous system by multiple means, right? Methods of magnetically, right? Transcranial magnetic stimulation of the visual areas of the occipital cortex, right? So stimulating the vision center of the brain with a watch, with a footprint or a form factor of a watch. Okay, that's an antenna and a watch. And we will get to antennas months from now, but they can do some ridiculous stuff with antennas. I'm still doing my own research on that. In addition to that, they can inject this stuff directly with an array of sensors on or under the skin, right? So they say here, it can also be done, instead of magnetically, through transcranial magnetic stimulation. It can be done electrically with an array of sensors on or under the skin. Okay, so that would be something like this. And let's pause this. We'll go here. Here is a beautiful, sexy smartwatch. And these are electrodes that are placed on the skin. And the housing is also conductive and everything else. So that's a watch. Okay. That's just a watch. I'll show you earbuds real quick, and then we're going to move on because we've covered this a lot, and we will again in detail. Earbuds. Capacitive electrodes on the skin to inject neural code or to stimulate your nervous system. In the ear, you have the trigomenial nerve and the vagus nerve, and they tie directly into your brain. These are Apple AirPods. Apple AirPods. And these have electrodes all over them. And these things can generate electric fields. Beats by Dre. Those of you that like high quality, high fidelity, right? Beats by Dre. Yeah. Well, these things generate electric fields. The AirPods and all of your headphones generate electric fields that interact with your brain and your nervous system. And this is not even all it can do, because the wireless signal can also interact with your brain with Bluetooth. Bluetooth is approximately a 12.4 centimeter wave. So from your ear into the center of your brain is how many centimeters? You can look up the circumference of the brain or the diameter of the brain, and you can figure out what the radius of the brain is. The radius is half of a diameter. So let's just do it for you. And we're going to get into what electromagnetics can do here in a minute. So, human bond communication with a wearable. Basic, with the wearable. The question is, can this be done without a wearable? And here we go. This patent right here. Method and a system for determination of physiological conditions and emotional states of a living organism. We briefly looked at this a minute ago, right? Using the extremely high frequency millimeter wave bands to interact with the brain and the nervous system to understand and or modify emotions and understand and or modify illness and disease. That is what this patent discusses, and we will go through it. Millimeter to sub-millimeter wavelengths, 30 gigahertz to 1 terahertz. So everybody's all hot to trot on 60 gigs, right? Oh, 5G, 60 gigs. Okay, well, great. Yes, that's right. 5G is also a lot of other frequencies as well. A lot. And when you look at Google's radar patents for their little Sol-E chip, which is going to be the industry standard because there are other companies making the same thing, that thing runs all the way up to 300 gigahertz and can go down way below 30 gigahertz. It goes down to 1 gigahertz, which likely means it goes down into the lower frequency ranges too. So there's huge amount of play there with respect to the frequencies that are available. Therapeutic treatment, right? Extremely high frequency, 30 gigs to 1 terahertz for therapeutic treatment. The predetermined modulated electromagnetic waves being in the EHF carrier signal range, right? 5G, which is called 5G. Keep it simple, right? Modulated by a predetermined information signal, which means that you have a carrier wave, that's your base frequency, and you modulate that with a different frequency, and that's how you transmit information in the wireless world, but it's also how you transmit this stuff. An information signal can be applied to the skin of a living organism. The predetermined information signal can include information for modifying an organism, meaning you, a human, such as the physiological condition and emotional state, the emotional state with millimeter wave energy. In such a case, the amplitude, frequency, and or phase modulation functions can be detected from a healthy organism, right? Can be used with an EHF signal. You can modulate that stuff, right? And when it has the healthy information on it, modulated on the millimeter waves, it can be applied to somebody who's sick, and this information can be conveyed to the spinal cord and to the brain to regulate the functioning of the organism. So this is for a medical application. Imagine what this can do to people that they don't like. Your emotions and your physiology, physiological condition. Now, what does all that really mean? There's a lot to this patent. We could spend a whole show reading over this patent, but that is the basic of it. Now, they get into how neurons work and all of this, right? So what they're really doing is, in this particular paragraph, is they're talking about sweat ducts, and they act as spirals and therefore function as inductance coils, meaning they're a pickup antenna in an electric circuit. Their coupling with known capacitance and resistance, the human skin, raises the possibility of considering the human skin as a spatial distribution of circuits composed of resistors, capacitors, and inductors, known as RCL resonant circuits. And this is done with the electrolytes in your skin. So an individual pattern of sweat glands distributed in each person, which can allow to utilize unique bioelectric signatures associated with the bioelectric activity of sweat glands, which means you are different than someone else, which is different than someone else, and different than someone else. There will be general applications and there will be specific targeted applications because your sweat gland configuration is unique to you. And at that point, the only thing that is restrictive is the amount of specificity or sophistication with which the system is going to apply to you. How good are the algorithms? How many antennas do they have to generate these millimeter waves? And if they have enough and the right sophistication, they can build a special profile for you, targeted medicine. Question is, at what point are the commercial grade networks going to allow general application and then targeted application? What are we really building? So what I want to show you here, I'm going to search for a couple things here. I'm going to search for flu. Let me see if I can find, where's the search box? Let's search for flu. This talks about the skin. Oh, we're going to pause. Electromagnetic radiation patterned, generated by the sweat glands, depends on their structure and morphology. 2 to 4 million sweat glands. Radiation pattern is indicative of an organism's conditions. This is them being able to read and then just invert it because they talk about an active application, right? Example of physiological conditions include, but are not limited to, conditions caused by exercise, hot weather, humidity, illness, puberty, menopause, menstruation, metabolism, etc. Examples of emotional states include, but are not limited to, stress, anxiety, fear, anger, nervousness, embarrassment, panic, general neurological disorders, etc. They can remotely read all this. Here it is. Moreover, various diseases are known to influence the sweat gland complex, which would lead to a disease-specific change in the radiation pattern associated with the sweat glands. Oh, they can just irradiate me with millimeter waves, and they can understand what my disease condition is in addition to my emotional condition, and or if I've been exercising or not exercising, and all the other surveillance stuff with wireless energy that's invisible, that doesn't require a microphone or a camera or any of that stuff. Travel through walls. It can be delivered from space. It can be delivered from a cell phone. It can be delivered from a Wi-Fi router. It can be delivered from a cell site. And I'll continue. Examples of such diseases that can be remotely monitored and or corrected and or created, right, include, but are not limited to, fever, flu, cold, pneumonia, malaria, severe pain, hypoglycemic attack, AIDS, hyperhidrosis, anhidrosis, cancer, Frey syndrome, etc. The detected radiation pattern can be indicative of corresponding disease in the living organism and can thus be utilized for diagnostics. Okay, then they talk about the skin being 12 to 16% of the body, total body weight. I have broken this pattern down, taken things, put them out of order in order to categorize them. I want to show you one more thing: biometric collection and storage. Converting low frequency information from an analog form to a digital form. So kind of like the human bond communication thing, kind of like tapping into the brain and pulling the analog signals out and putting them into a digital form. They're just doing it from your skin. And they understand the skin conditions well enough to be able to classify things like disease, emotion, and other stuff. Digitized information can be put into the frequency domain, and a biometric signature can then be in the form of a frequency spectrum of digitalized information. Digitalized information. Surveillance is so much more than a camera and a microphone, folks. I mean, you might as well just be walking around naked. Just put it that way. And I'm talking like your brain too. Open book. Just because you don't speak it doesn't mean it's not known. and this is the real, when you talk about Section 230, what the fuck ever, man. Section 230 sets a foundation for what big tech will continue to get away with in the future. Censorship. Because censorship takes many forms. They can censor your speech. Well, can they censor your emotions? Can they censor your thoughts? Can they censor your health? The technology is here. I mean, it's here. So there's a lot more going on than, just my speech. In practice, a database, you say, really? In the cloud, cloud-based, everything? Anything as a service, software as a service? You mean my health as a service? I'll show you that document, by the way, not today. I'll show you the document that the FDA has linking to an international document talking about medical software as a treatment, right? In practice, a database, reference data of various biometric signatures and characteristic parameters, right? Location, magnitude, resonance factor of the peaks of the frequency spectra patterns, your unique biometric patterns, and your unique biometric patterns when you have a disease will be cataloged. The amplitude and the correlation function, effective correlation of times and peaks and autocorrelation function, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, derived from the signature can be created for each subject. Oh, we all have our own little dossier, each living organism, and then stored in memory or in the cloud. Thereby, each living organism can be cataloged. This database can include records establishing the correlations between the unique biometric signatures and their parameters and various conditions, physiologic and emotional. Your physiology, your health, what you do, your daily routine, your daily habits, and your emotions, how you respond to whom and why, and what it does to you is all known. And it's all digitized. And it's all put through an algorithm, and it's all actuaried out. And so if they want you to feel like shit, this patent basically says they can make you feel like shit. They can make you feel like you're in ecstasy too. And they can give you the flu and give you cancer and all kinds of other stuff. So all the stuff, all the fear mongering, quote unquote, that's out there about 5G is real. The question is, who has their hands on the levers? And right now, it's big telecom and big tech, and they're giving us the big middle fucking finger. That's really what's happening right now. And this is why they know where they're at with this technology. And it's only a matter of time before the majority of the population is saturated with this stuff in the dense urban populations. And they think it's game over because they can ebb and sway and flow emotional sentiment and induce disease whenever they want. And what do we have right now? What are we going through globally right now? And this is why I showed you last episode all of this and the fact that they went into Doomsday Bunker in Colorado Springs and they launched their AEHF satellite system and brought that online and opened up Space Force. There's a lot more, in my opinion, going on than the stupid dog and pony show that's modern fucking politics. Pardon my language, man. This stuff pisses me off because we're being raped. We're literally just being raped up one side and down the other. So databases is where we were at, and due to the potentially sensitive nature of such personal information when required, the data in the database may be processed through an encryption algorithm and stored in the memory of a control system because, HIPAA and all that stuff. Yeah. Like they really, they pass around your information like they do, fill in the blank. A joint, a whore. It's what they think we are. To be consumed as animals. Let's move on. Now, this guy was also talking about being able to remotely control, generate, and remotely trigger and activate cells, right? And we're going to stay focused in the electromagnetic realm here. System and method for electromagnetic radiation for influencing cellular structures, right? Radiate electromagnetic waveform energy onto a target tissue, for example, a cellular structure, during radiation of a target tissue in accordance with predetermined titration light protocol, little by little, by little by little, by little by little, titration, to influence the waveform energy on the cellular structure. The protocol is stopped when the cellular structure has been transformed or morphed into a desired phenotype. They talk about being able to take a stem cell and make it a liver cell. And that's the example that they use. So they are able to resonate a cell and or DNA and be able to turn it on, turn it off, or transform it into something else with directed energy, whether it be with sound or whether it be with electromagnetics. Consider the specific case of a sonic wave and the effects it can have on tissues and cells. From a physical perspective, a tissue cell could be likened to a mechanical system. From this perspective, it also is to be appreciated that the pressure of a sound wave is a result of a fluctuation, a vibration component in the wave, and its transmission medium, for example, in the air, well, can also be done so in the body. I'll show you that with thermoacoustics soon. Probably next show, we'll talk about thermoacoustics, where they use electromagnetic radiation to create ultrasound in the body. The importance of these physical observations is that the sound acoustic pressure acts to exert a force against tissue, a mechanical system. And this will happen whenever a sonic wave is incident on the tissue, ultrasound in your body. Thus, the tissue will be influenced by externally applied forces that are associated with the sound wave. As implied above, the influence will manifest itself in the tissue. From a biological perspective, each cell, for example, a liver cell, will have an observable characteristic, or many, which naturally result from the cell's environment, when a set of observable characteristics is generally referred to as a phenotype. Further, it is known that a set of characteristics for a defined phenotype of a cellular structure can be epigenetically influenced by externally applied forces. Moreover, this can happen regardless whether the cellular structure is influenced in the body or not. And we will go over this patent in greater detail. I'll read this last paragraph and we'll move on because we have 10 minutes left. In light of the above, it is the object of the present invention to provide a system and a method for using radiation to epigenetically influence tissue cells to thereby alter their functionality in the body or not of any target tissue. It is another object of the present invention to provide a system and a method for using radiation energy to influence a change in the target tissue by tuning an electromagnetic wave to a wavelength that is related to the natural frequency, the resonant frequency of target tissue. It's still another object of the present invention to provide a system and a method for radiating waveform energy in accordance with the predetermined titration-like protocol, little by little, little by little, little by little, to epigenetically influence tissue cells for the transformation or the morphology of the target tissue into a desired phenotype, to change the inherent characteristics of cells or tissues in your body with electromagnetic energy. It is yet another object of this invention to provide a system and a method using radiation to epigenetic influence tissue cells, which is easily to use and commercially cost effective. That patent looks like this: a system and a method for electromagnetic radiation for influencing cellular structures. And there's more going on in this patent as well. They actually talk about being able to generate soliton waves, and that's a whole other discussion. We'll get into soliton waves at another time when we look at electromagnetic energy being able to influence cells more scientifically, where we actually talk about how they interrupt and interact with ion channel flows and how that deals with things like pain, and how the very same general processes can actually use organs and bone structures as resonant cavities. And in that patent, it literally talks about your bones being piezoelectric transducers that emit infrared light. the body's freaking crazy cool, and they can do all kinds of stuff to it with electromagnetic energy, especially when they can convert it to ultrasound in the body. And I will show you that in detail. If you want to research a crazy investment holding company, look these people up. Strathby Crown and Holdings. They are into some very interesting things. We may do a show just on them, but not today. The next patent I want to show you for the last 9 minutes is methods for determining therapeutic resonant frequencies. And why this is important is because this has everything to do with what this guy was talking about as it relates to being able to remotely activate cells. You can grow cells, steer cells, change cells, and then activate cells. You can introduce information into the body, or you can genetically manipulate it to have it express itself epigenetically. And I'll show you here right now. The abstract of this literally talks about determining resonant frequencies that can be used therapeutically or beneficially for debilitation on specific types of genomic materials, including DNA and or RNA, genes, or gene sections. So determining the resonant frequencies of DNA, RNA, specific genes within DNA, RNA, or gene sections. This includes proteins, most of which your body's made of. The methods can be used in a variety of circumstances related to various human and animal disease conditions. Methods allow the determination of therapeutic resonant frequencies for use in various media that have different refractivities. You mean like the difference between bone, fat, muscle, that kind of stuff? Therapeutic or beneficial resonance frequencies thus determined are adapted for use with currently available frequency emitting devices by shifting the resonant frequencies to electromagnetic ranges capable of being generated by such devices. So that's a real complex way of saying is they can upshift or downshift the resonant frequency characteristics by dividing or multiplying by 2 to find the appropriate harmonic or subharmonic in order to resonate your genes, your RNA, your DNA, or specific proteins, or any expression thereof with existing radio frequency transmitters. If you understand the transmitter bandwidth, you do the math with subharmonics, divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2, to get within the range of the transmitter that you have nearby. And we all have transmitters nearby. And I'll explain this to you. It literally talks about being able to quantify the actual length between each set of amino acids, the A, C, T, and G, right? So the helix, it looks like a ladder that's twisted, your DNA, right? So they can measure that between each rung of the ladder. They can measure that. It's known. It's like 3.4 angstroms. And so if you know the DNA sequence, you're able to do the math and actually come up with the right length and then pick the radio wave length that correlates with the right length of the DNA or the RNA that you want to talk to, and then do your math with the harmonics, divide by 2 or multiply by 2 to get within the right range of what the transmitter is that you have available, and then amp up the power and you're able to resonate DNA. Here it is. Whether for stimulation or for debilitation, to excite or to suppress, depends to some extent on the type of frequency delivery system used, including variables such as power, waveform, harmonic content of the wave, and other factors, right? This is where software comes into play, and algorithms and complex waveforms. That's why the beamforming and the MIMO, massive input, massive output, MIMO. It's why these things are so important. It's why 3D beamforming is so important, and why power spectrum is so important inside of beamforming. All of these things are new characteristics with 4G and 5G technologies. They are being commercialized. So it talks about being able to divide by 2 Here it is right here. Particular devices are often capable of generating frequencies only in a narrow range. To overcome such limitations, methods of the present invention adjust resonant frequencies upwards or downwards, for example, to determine an appropriate lower range frequency in accordance with the present invention. The therapeutic resonant frequency is divided by the number 2 as many times as necessary until a frequency in the frequency generating range of the device that's nearby is reached. The power of 2 by which a therapeutic resonant frequency is factored will depend on the range of the electromagnetic spectrum with which a frequency delivery device operates. So, do you know what the frequency bands are in your phone? What about your Wi-Fi router? What about the cell tower nearby? What about the AM/FM transmitter? What about the digital TV transmitter? In music, it would be similar. It'd be like moving from a higher octave to a lower octave. To give you an analogy, in accordance with the methods of the present invention, therapeutic resonant frequencies of genomic material shifted by octaves to a lower octave in the electromagnetic spectrum by dividing the therapeutic resonant frequency by some power of the number 2. So they're correlating the octaves in a musical scale with dividing the resonant frequency of whatever they want to talk to, destroy, grow, manipulate, whatever, dividing it by 2 to get to the right frequency range that a transmitter nearby is able to produce. And when I say transmitter, I'm talking antenna or speaker, because this can be done with sound, and I'll show you that in upcoming episodes. The same stuff can be done with ultrasound. And when we look more at electromagnetic energy, beyond just getting the right frequency to resonate the cell, you can also convert electromagnetic energy into ultrasound in the body. It's a very, very critical piece that needs to be understood. We're going to go over it again and again and again and again and again. Because this is how it's done. One of the primary ways. Using the spacing between adjacent base pairs or bases and multiplying the number of base pairs. We're talking about DNA, base pairs, A, C, T, and G. Base DNA, right? Adenine, cytosine, guanine, tyrosine, I think. And I may be hacking up the names of those things. A, C, T, and G, base pairs. Multiplying the number of base pairs or bases in genomic material by the spacing between the adjacent base pairs, up or down. In the preferred embodiment, the base pairs or bases are spaced apart by an average spacing, which is known. It's approximately.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, to yell. I ain't done that in a while. Oh, good morning, good morning, good morning. All right. You make sure I get this on the right tab.